Hi, Kartik. How are you?
I am a little bit tired, but
So,
overall great.
so Kartik, it's been how many years of ETHGlobal now?
7 years, 130 events.
Yeah. So how was your general impression of DEF CON this week?
I actually really enjoyed the fact that this was a developer-focused community this time around. And I feel like we've seen a bunch of different waves.
Mm-hmm.
And this time it kind of gives me the same 2017, 2018 vibes. And that was a moment where people were actually excited about making the protocol better.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually found that refreshing.
I think I felt the same way.
Amazing. Well, that was
Yeah.
my first question to you, too. My math says you have done 26 different talks this week.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? Or is there
I
more?
mean, do you want me to count now? Okay.
Uh, it's,
Do you count? Okay. Do you count talks or do you count like events that I've been to? Like maybe talks is simpler. Okay. So hold on. 2 plus 2 plus 11. Okay, that's 15. Then that was before DEF CON.
okay.
Then, okay, during DEF CON, what was the first
First day,
day? I
first
think it
hour.
was like, I think it was like 3 plus 4 plus 3 plus 3, so about 13. So that gets us to 28. And then I still have like, I think like one more. So,
30.
mm,
That's a very busy schedule.
mm,
What were some of your favorite moments from that whole week?
mm. Um, DAC Day was fun. So that was yesterday. So that was it was really amazing to like actually see that whole community come together and people who are doing really fascinating bioscience together with people working on computer security, together with people working on prediction markets and neurotech and like all of those different concepts all just come together and like actually function as one community and like just seeing the progress in all of those individual fields. So that was really impressive. The very beginning of DevCon, I mean, especially in the opening part, the like, I felt like the choice of just like putting so many anime themes in there was just like perfect. Like, yeah.
That's that's the Ethereum I know.
Exactly. Yeah.
Awesome.
Mm,
Well, maybe let's go into some of the stuff that I know the rest of the internet's been talking about,
mm.
and that is Justin Drake's talk.
Okay.
So, what I'm kind of curious about is what do you, as Vitalik, think about Beam Chain?
Mm. So I think almost all of the ideas in there are like basically correct, right? And they're like basically very similar to things that have been talked about in the Ethereum research space for quite a while, right? You know, they're right in my the roadmap documents that I've published. I think the two places where I would either disagree or at least express uncertainty on substance are one is short SWAT times. So I worry about short SWAT times because I think it would hurt, like it risks hurting both like fairness toward people in geographically non-central locations. It's like even if theoretically you can optimize the loop down so that theoretically someone who is based in Latin America or Southeast Asia or Ghana or New Zealand can participate in creating a block. If it's the case that it they still suffer like a lot, like even like 10 or 20% incentive wise, then like even if they can, they won't, right? And so I think like for that reason, you actually want to be a lot more careful. And also you want to be robust against potential breakdown in internet communications. You want to be robust against potentially a rise in censorship and like other kinds of active attacks against the chain. And so I don't think that the Ethereum L1 should like over optimize and say like, okay, the Earth's like half circumference is 20,000 kilometers. That divided by the speed of light is 67 milliseconds times 3 rounds of communication. Therefore, the L1 should have 200 millisecond block times, right? That's like the kind of thinking where like, okay, like I think the seem to lab trolls people on Twitter way too much and equals overlord, but if you do that, Kiro like say the word fragile at you 500 times and you will deserve every single one of them, right? So I think Ethereum needs to be way more cautious than that. That's like one piece. And then Not to say that I think 12-second SWAT times are optimal, right? I think we should just do the research, and we're not sure yet how far we can go. And then the other thing is like the trade-off between doing it all at once versus doing it more incrementally. And I think we should like start the work and then figure out over time what the right approach is. I think. I mean, I saw there has been a lot of criticism of the beam chain, but it's not like criticism of the beam chain as the beam chain. It's criticism of this like perception and I think realistically misperception, miscommunication that the beam chain is Ethereum 3.0, and basically like everyone is the thing that everyone is supposed to put their hopes on is that this specific set of redesigns that will come in 2029, and that's like not true at all, right? So even within the beam chain roadmap, like the huge numbers of things like dank sharding, expected to come 2025, 2026. So the thing that matters for users in terms of scale will come much sooner. And also, like the entire beam chain roadmap is just consensus layer, right? So aside from consensus layer, Ethereum is also execution layer. So that includes the EVM. There's a whole other roadmap for upgrading the EVM. Then you have layer twos. Then you have cross layer 2, and there's a whole other roadmap for upgrading the cross layer 2 situation. Then you have wallets, and then today, actually about 15 minutes ago, the Clave team showed me how they like fully integrated social recovery and even ZK email recovery. And
Amazing.
so, there's like a whole roadmap for like doing the, like wallet UX on both the convenience and the security side. So the consensus part of Ethereum is like less than a quarter of everything in Ethereum that is being upgraded, and there's just so many other parts that are moving way faster than a 5-year timeline that are extremely relevant to developers and users.
So a few follow-up questions. And by the way, this is a great actually intro to understanding kind of what are the misconceptions here.
Yeah.
My understanding is that this 5-year timeline is a conservative guesstimate. But
I mean, I think it's actually a reasonable or maybe even slightly aggressive set of estimates for the full set of things that Justin wants to do. You just have to remember that like 2029 is the timeline for Nirvana, and even a quarter of Nirvana is like incredibly useful, right? And like the things that users need are come much, much sooner than like the completion of the entire vision.
And this is effectively clarifying that
Yeah.
you're not waiting for the 5 years to do the whole thing as a massive single push. These are
Exactly.
all parts where you actually get to the finish line when the last one is confirmed a few years down the road. What is the differentiation between the part that Beamchain focuses on and the parts that were already outlined in the roadmap that you've outlined before? Because we're effectively, not the right word, but cherry picking certain things and prioritizing those over the rest of the plan. Is that a fair way to think about it? How kind of does that relate to the rest of the roadmap? And does this mean that we are going to be less focused on finishing the rest of this?
I would say absolutely not. I mean, I would say, yeah, Ethereum right now is very good at parallelizing, right? And so there is a team that is working on statelessness. There is a team that is working on EVM upgrades. There is a team that is working on MEV issues, right? There's a huge amount of parallelism that's happening already. And so I definitely do not expect that Justin is going to like pull away researchers who would otherwise be giving us like Virtual trees or Starked binary trees. That's like just not how this ecosystem works at all. I mean, I think actually the higher, more likely possibility is that this roadmap is going to be able to pull in people into the specking process who would otherwise not be able to participate at all. Just like how the Beacon chain like pulled in an entire set of client devs who were not part of client dev at all before, right? So I think like that's really Justin's goal. I think like all of the other things that are happening are still happening, and there are huge sets of developers that are and huge constituencies that will benefit greatly from each of those things happening that are putting huge amounts of resources into making them happen. So I definitely don't view it at all as being competitive.
Okay. One thing that I also saw this week on the internet was a lot of smaller and some bigger arguments around the lack of focus that they're seeing from core devs and the Ethereum Foundation. It's a very interesting thing because there were a lot of arguments around it, but there was not a lot of justification or explanation. But the part that I do actually want to talk about is one comment was from John Charbonneau saying that it's actually not clear that the Ethereum core devs actually agree on what the product is. And just the way you kind of answered the question just now implies that Justin has his own version of what the next set of prioritization should be, and you have a different sort of opinion, and a few other people may have a different version. Is this coordinated? Is that what it feels like? How do you kind of address these types of comments?
I mean, look, like Bitcoin has that exact same problem, but even more so. Like, do you think everyone in Bitcoin agrees on OpCat, right? Do you think everyone in Bitcoin agrees on what even comes after OpCat? It's like having internal difference of opinion is not a failure mode. It is a decentralized, pluralistic ecosystem, right? And like, no, Ethereum is not taking the iPhone approach. Like, if that's what you want, there's plenty of other blockchains for you, and realistically, there's plenty of things that offer far more scale and far lower latency than blockchains that are for you, right?
So then tell us why that is actually not something you want to go do as Ethereum, and why does it matter that we have this approach to building software?
Yeah, I mean, I think, okay, so one other thing that I think is important, right, is that what Ethereum is with respect to developers, I actually think is incredibly clear, right? So Ethereum is the world computer. Layer 1 is the trust machine. It's the anchor. It holds everything together. It holds high-value applications that really depend on it. And Layer 2 is the GPU. It provides speed and it provides scale. And that includes a very heterogeneous combination of rollups and other systems that have all kinds of speed and scale trade-offs for all kinds of different applications. Like that is what Ethereum is, and basically it's the vision that it's been going for all the way since 2020, right? I mean, I think there is the separate question of like, what do people think is the economic model of ETH, the asset? And I think the challenge there is like, there's this weird magnifying glass on ETH as though ETH has this like much greater responsibility to answer this question than everyone else, when like the reality is like, what is okay, look, like Doge. Doge went up by like, what, like 40%, 50% the last 2 days. Why did it go up? It went up, I think, because Elon and Trump and like co announced that they're making a Department of Government Efficiency. Like, okay, first you have a coin, and the coin had value because it had a dog. Now you have a coin, and the coin has value because there's a government department named after a dog. Okay, so like explain this in the lingo of like PE ratios and like discounted cash flows and like anything that's intelligible to a finance professor at a university, right? Or even Bitcoin, right? Remember how back in 2019 Bitcoin had the stock to flow model, and like it's like, you know, you take the like flow rate, which is like the number of Bitcoins being issued, and then divided by stock, and then you raise and then you like invert that and you raise it to the power of 3.3, and then basically it's like the guy figured out that this is the model that like perfectly fits Bitcoin's up, or no, it was the 463-day moving average of that is the thing that perfectly fits Bitcoin's price up to that. And then it's like basically the year after the stock to flow model got like accepted and beloved by everyone in the Bitcoin community, it basically stopped working, right? And then if you look at the charts, like actually it's like the Bitcoin price started going up at exactly the time when the 463-day EMA stock to flow stopped moving up, right? And so it's like basically the whole thing is just like completely stupid, and like the like half the Bitcoin influencer class like actually believed it for a couple of years, right? And so I think the conclusion is like nobody friggin' has a clue how these things are valued, and this isn't an Ethereum problem. This is not even a crypto problem. Like, honestly, yeah, this is just
how crowds behave irrationally.
Exactly, right? It's like the world is just a fundamentally incredibly chaotic place where there's even today a huge amount of things that we know very little about, and we are constantly learning. And to me, the benefit of ETH as an asset is that it's at the center of this very diversified ecosystem that it has, and so basically it has exposure to a whole range of different applications and like, to use a very cringe word, theses, right? So, it has like, there's multiple flavors of layer 2s. There's layer 1 applications. There is people using ETH as collateral in a bunch of applications, and you basically need like any one of these succeed for it to do well.
But I think one pushback I'll give you here is that I don't think it's a binary choice, right? It's not like, well, we don't want to be the Apple here and dictate every single aspect of what the features should be.
Yeah.
And we also don't want to be, well, everybody can figure out what they want. We'll kind of collectively address if they agree or not. Kind of from that perspective, why is it important to take the approach that leans towards not being fully dictatorial about the decision making of how we improve the protocol, but separately, why are we not making the layer 1 faster?
I mean, I think the reason not to just keep bumping up the gas limit is that like, decentralization is one of those things that once you lose, it's hard to get it back. And the Ethereum community actually has a track record of getting it back, but every time you see a centralization stat or a censorship stat improving, behind that stat are like hundreds of hours of sweat and tears of like Danny and Justin giving impassioned phone calls to like all kinds of different ecosystem actors. You have all kinds of people talking to each other. You have like Evan Van Ness and friends like making a very loud case of like something on Twitter. You have just like all kinds of different people fighting really, really hard to try to push the ecosystem toward a more decentralized equilibrium. And like sometimes there actually are successes, right? But on the other hand, like slipping from more decentralization to more centralization is something that's actually easy, right? And I think the risk is, right, that is basically that if you look at the end game, right, the end game is that we want 100,000 transactions a second, right? And
on the L1.
No, the end game is that we want 100,000 transactions a second. Now, the 100,000 transactions a second cannot live on the L1, because if they live like an L1 that can actually directly run 100,000 transactions a second, like that, there is just no way to run that on a node at the same time as having a decentralized network, right? Basically the only approach that you can basically ends up looking like what we call enshrined rollups, and like that actually is one of the long-term ideas that's being considered, right? But like doing it directly, like there's no way to do that. That's not centralizing. And so the risk is that if we take a halfway house approach and we say, okay, well, instead of doing 15 TPS on L1 and say 985 TPS on L2, we're going to do, let's say, like 60 TPS on L1 and 940 TPS on L2. The risk is that, well, you've actually significantly centralized the L1, and what have you gotten? Well, instead of 98% of activity being on L2, you have 94% of activity being on L2, right? And so I think this is one of those things, right, where if you go in that direction, sometimes it's easy to make it in response to a knee-jerk judgment, but then like you have to be really clear about like what you aim to get and like what risks you're taking, right? And so I personally I do support L1 increasing in scale, and I do support both moderate gas limit increases, EVM repricings, introduction of entirely new features like EVM Max and SIMD that could greatly accelerate EVM computation of specific operations, be very beneficial to L2s and to L1-based privacy protocols, right? But I think this is something that should happen like reasonably and at a gradual pace, right? And at the same time as L2 scaling can happen very aggressively.
So is decentralization in this example and just in this kind of decision making purely the ability for any individual to just run with the same specs and assuming that the hardware requirements are accessible? Is that kind of the only axes that we're looking at?
So one is number of distinct people who run nodes. Another is a number of both solo stakers and even small and medium enterprise stakers that are like actually staking. So you have those stats, right? And again, this is one of those things where it's not about capability, it's about incentive, right? In the sense that like a lot of the time people say things like, oh, you can buy a 20 terabyte hard drive for like $5,000 or whatever the number is, right? and like therefore requiring 20 terabytes of storage is actually not that bad, right? But that's the wrong metric. The metric is you don't want running a node to be possible. You want running a node to be easy enough that it's a thing that people consider doing by default, right? And the challenge is basically that if running a node becomes more costly, then even if it's theoretically possible, people get lazy, people start aggregating all over their nodes and basically all like trusting one operator to do everything, and like that itself starts this slide toward an ecosystem where you have a relatively small number of actors that are actually interpreting the rules. And once you have a relatively small number of actors that are interpreting the rules, that means you have a relatively small number of actors that need to be convinced to change the rules. And so from the perspective of someone building an application that needs to last like 5 or 10 years, or even from the perspective of someone building a layer 2, right? The thing that you want out of the layer 1 is robustness. The thing you want out of the layer 1 is that you want something that is going to be what it promised to be, right? And I think that's something that's really valuable for Ethereum L1, just like for Bitcoin L1 to really take seriously and not be willing to give up easily.
That makes a lot of sense, and I think
It's enough.
actually I have a couple of follow-up questions there, but I'm not going to do that because that'll be a personal tangent that I go into. The thing I'm kind of curious about is how does this tie into the L2 roadmap? So is kind of the bet that let's make everything happen on the L2s because we are agreeing to the layer ones being more scalable over time, but we want to parallelize that so that eventually we can absorb this? Or is it that actually you think delegation of transactions is important to be on L2s and the layer one should be mostly just aggregating and rolling up instead of actually storing the raw hundreds of thousands of transactions if you ever get to that world?
I mean, I could definitely see certain types of high value activity continuing to be on L1 for quite a while, right? And I think if I mean, potentially that could even continue into the long term. We'll see, right? I mean, I think there's a lot of different long term end games. I do think it makes sense for at least some amount of activity to continue to be on L2, even in a long-term future where L1 like adds something like native rollups, right? And I think like that one's true for two reasons, right? One of those reasons is that like even if L1 adopts native rollups, I think realistically core devs would want to do it in a way that is minimally opinionated and in a way that like gives developers maximum flexibility. And so it'll be done in a way that like basically makes it easy for even existing L2s and like even based rollups to just slot themselves into the framework and just continue to function. So that's one part. And then another part is that I see the like valid room for two different kinds of L2s, right? Like one kind that is focuses more on decentralization and maximum security and like inheriting the properties of L1 as much as possible. And I also see the room for L2s that focus on maximum scale, that focus on maximum speed, and that give things like very low latency, pre-confirmations, way more data than Ethereum like data availability will be willing to offer. And those kinds of things are just inherently not going to be native rollups, right? Those kinds of things are inherently going to be L2s. And so that's a niche that I think will like continue to persist even into the long-term future, and it's going to have a lot of applications on it.
Is it okay to accept single points of failures for these L2s because some of them will make these compromises for higher latency or faster throughput, but not settle as fast, and you kind of do those trade-offs? What's a good framework for understanding why you should just be defaulting to all the L2s and how to think about that growing?
Yeah, I mean, so I think, I mean, if you're an application that does not demand low latency, then it just makes sense to be on an L2 that offers higher levels of decentralization. If you're if you are an application that does demand very low latency, then I do think that we as an ecosystem need to have a more rigorous discipline of like figuring out what fallback mechanisms actually are realistic, right? Because right now, the theory that we have so far basically says, okay, you're on an L2, it has a centralized sequencer. If the centralized sequencer starts being bad, you can exit, right? But like, what does exiting actually mean, right? If you have like let's say, you have like Eve Frontier, right? Like Eve Online's new thing. And let's say it becomes an L2 that is low latency optimized. Well, let's say Eve servers disappear and you want to mass exit. What does that actually mean, right? Well, like, how would users like actually migrate to some kind of new provider that would actually keep the game running for them, right? Like, that's an open question. Or another one is, in some cases, you have this idea that, well, if the sequencer goes bad, you have a governance mechanism that can change the sequencer. If that happens, well, what would that governance mechanism actually look like? Would it actually try to detect, like, say, MEV abuse? If it does, how do you actually detect MEV abuse? Is this something that can be automated? Or another example is like, from an application perspective, a lot of the time, what you're worried about is you're not worried about like actual theft, you're worried about vendor lock-in. And so if an L2 starts becoming vendor lock-in toward you, and let's say an L2 even makes a governance upgrade, right? Like imagine an L2 does something where they start suddenly introducing a wealth tax into their system, but they go through the governance upgrade channel, they have a 30-day delay, it satisfies the stage 2 definition, technically everyone can exit, but like actually can the collective set of users of an application like actually coordinate and do an exit, right? And like I do think our ecosystem like really needs a rigorous discipline of like thinking through those issues and like actually even wargaming some of them and figuring out like what could users and application developers collectively do in that kind of situation.
Well, I hope we don't get to see those situations often, but we still need a way to think about addressing them.
Yeah, absolutely.
I
I mean,
do.
I think, in DYDX v3, I think, shut down a few days ago, right? And like,
You're right.
we actually saw some mass exits come out of that, and that seemed pretty orderly, but like, that was users on an application-specific rollup, right? I think the big test is what happens when an application needs to mass exit, right? It's like, imagine if, let's say Polygon became a proper stage 2 L2, and Polymarket was still on Polygon. But then Polygon would suddenly, let's say it had a 30-day window for governance updates, and someone bought up half the Polygon token, and then they said, okay, we're making a governance upgrade, and the governance upgrade says we're going to grab all the money in Polymarket. Can Polymarket as an application mass exit? What does that actually mean, right? Like, when something like any kind of instance of an application mass exiting happens, like I think that would be the next big test for the Ethereum ecosystem to pass.
I think that's a very interesting world to see how you're going to design applications this way, especially as we see
Be,
a bigger set of contracts going to be getting deployed as actually immutable. Wow. I do want to change topics a little bit. I want to go back to one interesting announcement that we heard from the kickoff at Devcon, and that was kind of the spin out or kind of the formation of Argo Collective, where Solidity, Faye, Sourcify, all of the teams were kind of moving over to a new nonprofit. And the big question I have is, why is that transition happening? And why is that now part of the Ethereum Foundation, especially when you have pretty core features of the protocol being worked on by these teams? Does it make sense to create a separation?
Yeah, and so the Ethereum Foundation has, for a long time followed this philosophy of subtraction, right? And the way that I think about it is that the Ethereum Foundation's mission is not to grow the Ethereum Foundation. The Ethereum Foundation's mission is to grow the civil society of Ethereum, even if needed at the expense of the Ethereum Foundation, and eventually at the expense of like potentially 100% of the Ethereum Foundation's existence, right? And so not necessarily, but potentially, right? And the reason why this is important, right, is that like if you take the analogy to politics, right, a lot of the time, one of the ways in which like very centralized forms of government, like very totalitarian ones, end up arising is when you have something that collapses, but then you don't have a strong civil society like that is able to take on the reins. And what we mean by civil society is like basically something other than either the centralized organ or profit-motivated actors, right? If you don't have a civil society, then like basically you end up collapsing into just having profit-motivated actors, and then that itself is a very centralizing game. And then like very quickly you end up just like sliding into yet another equilibrium where you have either like some kind of very centralized scenario, or you have something more chaotic where the end result again is a very centralized scenario, right? And so if you want to avoid that situation, having a strong civil society, like having a strong decentralized body of actors that is that has a strong tradition of acting together as an ecosystem and that is motivated by goals other than profit maximization, like basically is the kind of social immune system that can actually make an ecosystem resilient, right? And so the goal of the foundation is basically making sure that Ethereum has that, right? And
So the
yeah,
philosophy makes sense,
right.
but I think the question is, how do you kind of think about the execution? Now
Yes.
you kind of create this dependency of if they want to grow, they need to figure out additional funding,
Right.
or now somebody else can approach them, and that may create a whole new set of incentives to prioritize
Indeed.
something else. How does that work
Mm-hmm.
when we kind of think about something as critical as solidity?
Yeah, I mean, so I think we need to acknowledge that there is an unsolved problem here, right? And even the Ethereum Foundation, right, does not have an infinite lifetime, right? And to be clear, like the amount of funding that we're planning to give Argot is it's not like 2 years and then ask again level funding. It's like endowment level funding, right? It's meant to be smaller than EF, but in principle equal longevity to EF as an Ethereum institution, right? And so I think in terms of like solidity longevity, right, like that happening inside of Argot, it does not make the problem worse, but it does still leave open the fact that there is this open question in terms of longevity. And I think the way that I think about this actually is that I do think that there is an actual open problem that I do acknowledge within the Ethereum ecosystem, which is basically that I think there is like a lack of like medium scale and kind of hybrid nonprofit and for-profit funding models, right? Basically, like what often happens is that if you have a bright new public good idea that has no business model whatsoever, but it's like clearly public good in a way that a lot of people like in the ecosystem recognize, there are plenty of actors that will give you $100,000 grant. There's actors that will give you a $300,000 grant or even $500,000 grant. The problem is that once you go from like $300,000 demo size to $30 million production size, your incentive basically switches from like full socialist, Garden of Eden, the good people take care of you, all the way into full capitalist. Your only source of funding comes from fully profit motivated actors, right? And so you basically go from like Garden of Eden all the way into the jungle, right? And this is like a very rapid shift, and like I think it is an unhealthy dynamic that this rapid shift exists, right? And so I do think that the ecosystem will be more healthy if we actually do see like more of these more mechanisms that are in the middle, more mechanisms that do have some way of getting profit, do have some way of returning capital to investors, even growing capital, but for at the same time, which are willing to make some level of sacrifices and to take a principled stance in terms of supporting Ethereum alignment and supporting Ethereum values, supporting open source, open standards, decentralization, passing the walk-away test, and like being positive sum toward Ethereum, positive sum toward the world, and like all of these different things that we care about, right? And like I think like figuring that out is still an open problem, and that's something that I'm willing to acknowledge.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And as you say this, I feel like the closest thing I've seen similar to this is actually the Mozilla Foundation, and they kind of do both sides of this, and you kind of still get to see all the amazing improvements.
Foundation is interesting, right? In that it's like both a success story, but then it's also a bit of a capture story because like their main customer is basically Google, right? And like like auctioning off that like search engine slots. So it's I mean, I think these are all like great examples to learn from, right? And then I think for each one, you want to like understand the successes and understand the failures, and ideally, yeah, come up with something. I mean, this is also one of the reasons why I think we want to have this a distributed ecosystem, right? Because like it's okay if each individual entity ends up having a business model that has a problem, as long as the problems all go in different directions. And so like instead of being additive, the problems like cancel each other out, or at least like insure against each other. Yeah.
It's going to be a pretty long experiment to figure out what works and what doesn't, which is actually exciting.
Absolutely. It's exciting for me too.
I want to talk about a couple more things before we wrap things up. One is something that we've kind of seen become more and more prominent over the last few weeks and especially this year. That is the role crypto has played in politics. You recently made a comment that kind of leveraging crypto to effectively prioritize certain government official elections is not something kind of what you signed up for. I may be butchering the direct quote, but we've kind of seen a lot of these things happen. We've seen a lot of positive and negative outcomes. And I'm kind of curious about kind of what you think now the role crypto plays in the world of politics, whether it's the US or the rest of the world. And do you have any different thoughts nowadays?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's playing very different roles, and I think often like very invisible roles in all kinds of different ways, right? I think even the ideas coming out of crypto are already upstream of a huge number of different things. I mean, obviously, the thing that we saw this year, right? I mean, I think two things, right? One is like just as an application, like I think Polygon was, Polymarket on Polygon on Ethereum was a very net valuable, contributor to the U.S. Info ecosystem, and I think in general, like it did help people be more informed about what's going on, both with regard to the election and even with regard to things that are happening or could happen within each party, right? And like that's to me like an example of like the positive side, right? Which is like applications that actually show sort of the spirit of decentralization, which is making things that are useful and that provide valuable information to people without relying on a centralized elite that gets to pre-decide like what is true and false and what is good and bad on behalf of everyone else. But then on the other hand, we definitely are seeing this phenomenon that like crypto is turning into this big pool of money, and the big pool of money is basically acting as this like big thing that is often sending a message that basically says like you do what we want or else. And I think there is something unhealthy to that, right? Like I do think that there is something unhealthy to the idea of
This
like
problem exists without even crypto. This happens all the time in general.
It's like it definitely is, the game that lots of big money actors are trying to play, right? But it's like the kind of game where even if you come in stage one, and then like stage one of the game feels like you want a thing and it feels like you got a thing, but the more you get into the loop, then like basically, instead of like becoming an actor that's providing an alternative to the machine, you're basically becoming an actor that's like actually reinforcing those exact same loops, right? And potentially, reinforcing the exact same mechanisms and like also if you're choosing politicians based on like how good they are for like crypto as an industry, that comes at the expense of choosing politicians based on how good they are for other things that people care about and even like the underlying values of crypto. It's like one of those games where even if you come in well intentioned, it's just like incredibly easy, I think, to keep convincing yourself that you're doing the right thing, and then eventually, from the next generation's perspective, like you actually do become the thing that people start to agree is like part of the center of power that needs to be rebelled against. And that's like something that I hope that we as an ecosystem can like preempt and like try to be better than.
And the fact that you may think this is what you're optimizing for, but it's a multiplayer game, and
yes,
this gets complicated and chaotic very fast.
No, multiplayer games are indeed incredibly chaotic and incredibly complex. I think people often think of politics as a tug of war. I mean, no, like politics is a whirlpool. Like a huge percentage of the time, the outcome of your actions is not even in the same direction as the direction in which you're originally pulling, right? Like sometimes you pull in a particular direction and you create a backlash that makes the situation even worse. Sometimes you pull in a particular direction and someone joins your faction and that person uses $8 billion of stolen customer funds to pull in the same direction. And then as a
Hypothetically.
result, people start like hating that entire direction for like a decade, even and like even the bits that like actually I think are reasonable and correct. And like it's this incredibly chaotic system, and like you have to like basically ask the question like, are you contributing signal or are you contributing noise? And I do think that if you just come in as a relatively naive actor, it's like very easy to think that you're contributing signal, but like actually be contributing noise, or like even worse,
No
like,
op.
yes, or like even worse than no op, like basically being a thing that just gets like co-opted by whoever the highest bidder is. Yeah,
Which sucks because now
yeah,
you've made that so more accessible with crypto, and that means you create these short-term outcomes that are
yeah.
worse.
Hmm.
Are there other things that you're spending time on beyond just scaling Ethereum and your role at the foundation?
Uh-huh.
What else interests you?
So right before I was in Bangkok for Devcon, I was in Chiang Mai for 6 weeks, and the Zuzalu pop-ups were happening there, right? And so this was like probably de facto sort of the second round of the experiment, right? So the first round was in Montenegro last year, and then there were a lot of little ones, but this time it was about like 10 of them all running in parallel, and all independently organized. I would say roughly half
And
a
all
thousand.
in Chiang Mai?
Yeah, all in Chiang
Wow.
Mai. I mean, there's actually also Zoo Thailand, which is happening very close to Bangkok right after Devcon. So that's also one. But these were in Chiang Mai, about half a thousand people, all in close proximity to each other. A lot of Ethereum people, and it was really impressive to see the community grow, to see the community like actually function, to start to see the concept of these pop-up cities find product market fit, to also start to see interest in a lot of these Ethereum adjacent topics really start to continue. Also, DIAC, which was this meme that came out of this post that I wrote back at the end of last year. So combining together Ethereum together with computer security technology and physical resilience and biodefense, like that whole bundle of topics. So at DEF CON, as I mentioned at the beginning, we had a DIAC day, and we had speakers from all of those topic areas present, and that seemed really successful. And so DIAC is really turning into this very coherent thing, and it does feel like out of like there's like about 5 or 10 different product market fits for pop-up cities, and one of the like I think building network effects for a lot of crypto applications that would otherwise not find a network effect on their own is one of them. And I think finding network effects for DIAC applications, and like at the same time as it even like synergistically with being intellectual salons for DIAC and for Ethereum, I think is definitely one of them.
What's an example of a DIAC application that is immediately useful or beneficial to people, and how can we think about network effects there?
So I think to name one in each category, one would be a hardware, Ethereum hardware device. So like actually maximizing the security with which you can access Ethereum, and I think the reason why that would be valuable and to do in a pop-up context is so that you can actually like build something and then push it out in the context of a community where you can actually try like community related use cases. One thing that was at Edge City is there was Cursive, which was a live use of FHE to help pairs of people identify common interests. And so you can actually like try these use cases live and then get feedback and then iterate on them. So that's the computer security side. Then on the info defense side, like collective governance use cases and like truth-seeking type of applications, even prediction markets, all of that could be useful inside of pop-ups. On the biodefense side, just making pop-ups safe against airborne diseases, making pop-ups environments where it's easy to have a very healthy culture, making pop-ups environments that are very conducive to just like everything that it takes to maximize your longevity. pop-ups as a vehicle for testing out technologies for physical resilience. Like people have been interested in actually doing modular construction, like other kinds of physical technology inside of them. So like all of those things are possible. Like basically anything that involves physical world coordination, and anything that actually like benefits from coordination and a tight feedback loop of coordination between developers and users, I think is something that is a potential pop-up city application.
Awesome. Actually, that's super cool, and I think we all get to watch the DIAC talks from Devcon, so we get to catch up on all the new things that are being tried out and experimented with. This is a developer-focused event, so my last question to you is actually giving us sort of a more focused preview of what we can expect on the protocol side of things. This is a very broad, generic question, but obviously, given the recent blog posts you've published, the book that people got to win today, I want to kind of condense this into a shorter time frame, which is, can you give us an idea for what we can expect on the layer 1 side or any of the scaling roadmap in the next 2 years and 2 years only?
I mean, I think maybe one like related question that would be good to answer is like, what are basically the valuable toys for hackers here to play with? So one example is EIP 7702. So this is an EIP that's making it into the next hard fork that is going to provide a lot of convenience and usability benefits to EOAs that will like put them on the same track as smart contract wallets. And there are like dev nets and test nets that are doing 7702 today. And so 7702 is absolutely ready for people to hack with. So that's one good example. Number 2, blobs. So we're going to see blob count increases, and thanks to PeerDOS and other technologies over the next couple of years. And so building on top of blobs, building like both layer 2s as well as other kinds of blob-based applications. Like I saw I think it was like Chi Joe and Phil Diane, like both had different like apps that would basically put like some kind of like DApp interfaces onto blobs. So a lot of like interesting applications like that. I guess that was example 2. Also not a protocol feature, but ZK wrappers of everything. So ZK email, ZK government ID, ZK like Web2 with TLS notary, ZK like some of everything, right? And I think this stuff has use cases in social recovery and like multi-sig wallets. It also has use cases in identity and reputation systems. So that stuff that I think is really valuable to work with. Also, cross L2 interoperability. So again, not part of L1, but coming soon, and there are things to play
with. Is that a comment on just we want to see more of, or you're saying there's actually improvements that we
It's happening, but I want to see more of. So one example of something that I think someone can build on today: take an existing open source wallet, fork it, make it support EIP 7683, make it support chain specific addresses, and so you're able to like copy and paste chain specific addresses, and then if you paste in an address that is on a different L2 from where you currently are, then it just automatically routes your transfer through an ERC 7683 intent-based exchange. And then also use Helios and like do light clients for L1 and for L2. You could do a mock-up of moving L2 configs onto L1 and turning them into smart contracts, and then support the version of chain-specific addresses that routes through that. Like basically, the entire set of features that is currently being thought about, like basically take them, put them into a wallet, or even put them into 2 wallets and then get them to talk to each other. Like that's a hackathon idea right there that I think would be really valuable. Then maybe 2 years away, stateless clients. Not sure if there's anything that's like worth building on right now.
What does that unlock?
Huh?
What do stateless clients unlock?
They unlock, basically, they make it much easier for users to run nodes that verify the chain, which is valuable both for stakers and for users. Okay, light clients for L1 and for L2, so Helios, basically take that and just like integrate that into wallets. I mean, I mentioned this, but it's like also really important. EVM Max and SIMD. I'm hoping we can get this within the next couple of years, and you can actually implement a lot of stuff much more efficiently with that. Also a project. Privacy protocols continue to be important. What other good things are coming over? I'm just trying to like go through the feature list. And there's definitely like staking stuff that you can do on top of single slot finality, or even on top of the orbit.
You've also talked about reducing the minimum staking requirements for ETH. Is that in the same window?
I think it's. I definitely want it to be considered. Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think those are the big things.
Those are pretty good things.
Yeah.
Well,
enshrined account abstraction, another one. So EIP 7701. But yeah, okay. That's the list.
A lot of good EIPs that you can actually play with right now, which is actually awesome. So for the biggest hackathon here in the world, it's going to be a good, fun weekend for all the hackers. Vitalik, thank you so much for this amazing conversation. Please give him a big round of applause.
Thank you.